LaxFactor Podcast. What is up, lacrosse fans? You're watching another episode of the LaxFactor Podcast. I am your lumberjack-looking host, Ted Hoost, and today we're going to talk about three things. We are going to, one, I'm going to rip through Syracuse and Johns Hopkins schedules. I'm actually going to do Hopkins first, and I'm going to do Syracuse after. They both of these teams traditionally have put out the toughest schedule year in and year out. They don't dodge teams at all, and they play fewer games than other teams. So they put an emphasis on quality week in and week out and on preparing for that game every weekend. And at least with Syracuse, they don't play a whole lot of weekday games, or hadn't traditionally, as they played through that first brutal stretch of their schedule, and Hopkins isn't too much different. So I want to discuss their schedules. I'm going to rip through and do win predictions, really, just kind of off-the-hip predictions for Hopkins' full schedule with a record at the end of the regular season, and I'll do the same thing for Syracuse. And then I also wanted to discuss about how players are putting out new training programs and my thoughts on, how worth it is that. So in this episode's end segment of Ask Ted, I'm going to answer the question, are these online training programs that the player's putting out worth the money that you would put up for your kid to play in them? So before we get into it, though, I want to discuss this week's sponsor, which happens to be one of those training programs, Series 1 by Sergio Salcido. He's got a new training program coming out called Train My Way. This edition is going to include 3 shooting drills, 3 dodging drills, 3 advanced technique drills, and 1 bonus drill, and it comes with 24/7 online accessibility. So to learn more, go to sergiosalcido48.com/TMW. But to keep that simple, I will put a link in the description so you can go to sergiosalcido48.com/TMW to learn more about his new series called Train My Way. And this is the first of a series of many. So link in the description, go visit it. And real quick, I do think that these training programs offered by the pros are worth it. So you can hear the full pitch on that in my segment of Ask Ted that'll be at the end of this podcast. But that is this week's sponsor. So let's get into this now here, and we'll go into first the deep dive down Johns Hopkins schedule. And as I said, I've been saying it for 2 years now. I think Hopkins needed to dumb down their schedule because it's absolutely brutal. And I figured they needed to dumb it down by at least 1 game, maybe 2 games. Maybe take one of those, like top 10 teams that they play every year, especially because their conference is pretty tough as well now. And, maybe replace that with a mid-level team that you're going to beat them 7 out of 10 times, as opposed to, kind of teams, some of the teams they're playing, there's kind of splitsies these days. So last year they go 8-8, and it's partially because of that brutal schedule. But the only reason they make their conference tournament and the NCAA tournament is they get a win over Maryland at the end of the regular season. Ohio State screwed the pooch, and they picked up a huge loss. So Hopkins gets in by virtue of beating Maryland, and Ohio State, I think, losing to Michigan, I think was how that swung. They end up 8-8, but leading into that, I think they were 5-7. At one point heading into their conference tournament, or 5-6. So they had a losing record late in the season, and used the 2 wins over Maryland to get into the conference tournament. And then that second win over Maryland in their conference tournament really is what propelled them into the NCAA tournament. So 2 late season wins over a very tough Maryland gets Hopkins in. They end up losing to Penn State in their conference finals by a goal, though, and they end up losing to Notre Dame in the NCAA tournament. So I think with Hopkins, one of their things was they had a young team. They didn't have a clear winner at the midfield position, not until late in the season anyway. And then I think it was kind of an off year for Kyle Marr and Cole Williams, but Joey Epstein, he played tough all year, but he really decided to start leading that team towards the end of the year. So I think that Cole Williams and Epstein coming together at the end of the year, mixed with Forey Smith, everyone, especially coming into this year, says Hopkins doesn't have that signature mid that can draw eyeballs, draw slides, and then free things up for the attackman. But I think Forey Smith became that midfielder at the end of the year last year for Hopkins, and I think we'll see that come into this year. So if you're one of the Petro must-go type people, I'm not with you. The guy wins. The guy wins despite playing the best of the best every year. So here are my predictions for their 2020 season. And as I said, I haven't prepared outside of just glancing at it. I'm flying off hip on these, and these are really more than anything just terrible half-baked predictions. So we'll see what happens. One thing to note, no Doyle Smith Cup this year versus UVA. Petro, maybe he's listening to me. He's not. And dropping one of those savage games and picking up something a bit more likely to become a win. I think that was important. We'll see. But UVA and Hop, they've met 94 times with Hopkins holding a definitive edge in the matchup, but that was going to turn, I think, with how loaded UVA is this year and should be for the coming year. So let's get into Hopkins' schedule blow by blow. I am bringing up my browser, and here we go. First game. February 8th, early one, against Towson. They dropped this one last year, I believe. Let's confirm that. I believe they dropped their first two last year, and that is confirmed. They lost to Towson at Towson last year, but Towson was a veteran-laden team, a ton of really solid attackmen. They've lost a lot. So Hopkins, they're going to win this one this year against Towson to open, and I think they're actually going to kind of do much better early this season than they did last year. Then they hit Loyola. Yeah. Okay. So they play Towson at home. That's a win for Hopkins. They play Loyola on the road, and I think that's going to be a win for Hopkins. They got brutalized last year by Pat Spencer and Loyola to the point that Spencer just looked like he was playing with the poor Blue Jays. So I think they're going to get a win there on the road. So they're going to start out 2-0. Then we move on to North Carolina. UNC is going to come to Johns Hopkins. The Chris Gray led UNC. This was a one-goal game last year, and I actually think that Hopkins got the win by a goal at North Carolina. And this year at home, I think they're going to lose. I think they're actually going to lose to North Carolina. I think Chris Gray led UNC is going to be solid. UNC brings back almost everybody, solid goalkeeping. So I think that they're a better team this year, and I think going on the road is going to be exciting for them with their new-look team, new-look offense. Last year they were very conservative, did not put up a bunch of points. I think that's going to change a little bit this year. Gray is going to draw a lot of attention, and UNC has already built well around him. So I think they're going to finish well. So Hopkins, they start out 2-1. They then go on the road and play Princeton and Michael Sowers. I think that Princeton just not there yet. I think Hopkins gets the win over Princeton. So at this point, they are 4-1, heading 4-1, and they're about to host Syracuse on March 7th. I think Cuse gets the win at Homewood. I think Cuse is loaded. I think they're solid up and down the field, even in cage. They're solid on attack. They're solid at midfield. They're solid on D, even with a couple of the losses from last year. And then in goal, they're solid as well. So I think Syracuse is going to take Hopkins at home. We're looking at Hopkins now 3-2. But then they go on a good stretch here. They play Mount St. Mary's, win. They play Navy, win. That the Navy's on the road. They play Delaware on the road. That's a win. So here we are, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 wins and only 2 losses up to this point against Delaware. So we're now sitting at March 17th at Delaware, and now they've got 6 wins after that Delaware win and only 3 losses. Then we got Michigan, win. So they're at 7-3. They've got Rutgers, win. Now they're at 8-3. Then they've got Penn State at home. Penn State's going to beat them at home. I believe Penn State's going to be a juggernaut, so they're going to drop that one. They are then going to go back on the road, beat Ohio State on April 18th, and then we've got April 25th against Maryland at home. I'm going to say Maryland's going to exact revenge on them at this point, and both teams need need just another quality win to just bolster their record to get into the NCAA tournament. But at this point, I think both of these teams will already be in the NCAA tournament, so I'm going to give them a loss to Maryland. So as I'm ripping through here, I think their wins are going to be against Towson, Loyola, Princeton, Mount St. Mary's, Navy, Delaware, Michigan, Rutgers, and Ohio State. So Hopkins during the regular season picks up 9 wins, and then losses would be to North Carolina, Syracuse, Penn State, and Maryland in the regular season. So I got Hopkins during the regular season going 9-4. They're going to make their conference tournament. What they do from there is anyone's guess, because once you make that tournament, the 4 teams that are going to make that tournament are probably going to be Penn State, Hopkins, Maryland, and take your pick beyond that. So I believe that it's depends on who the 2 or 3 seed ends up being with them, because I don't see. Yeah, I guess they could even end up being the 4 seed, but probably not. I think that based on my logic here, they end up being the 3 seed. So they're probably playing Maryland in the Big Ten Conference semifinal. So, they'll have lost to Maryland. They'll have to play them again, most likely, in the Big Ten Conference semifinals. So it'll be interesting to see how that pans out. But I've got Hopkins having a really good season, a bounce back season, probably getting themselves back to the 9-win plateau or so. And that'll obviously be good enough to keep them in the top 10 through the regular season and get them a legitimate bid to the NCAA tournament. And I'm glad for that. I think that Joey Epstein is good enough. I think they're going to find somebody to play solid in cage. The defense has been rough their defense has been starting. How do I say it? Their defense has had a rough time at the beginning of the season into late season, but it seems like they've been shoring up the bulk of their problems by the season's end and limping themselves into the playoffs, even with these down years that they've had. So I'm glad to see the resurgence. As I always say, I'm a Syracuse fan, so I should rejoice in Hopkins' losses, but I don't. As a lacrosse fan in general, I want to see some of these blue bloods not come back and dominate the ways that they did. They're not going to do that, but I don't want to see some of these blue bloods go away. Sergio, Salcido48.com. Go check that out. There will be a link in the description. There will be a coupon code to go along with that. If you want to support the channel beyond that, you can go to LaxFactor.com. You can listen to the full version of this podcast in one shot, the full audio version of this podcast, or you can watch these videos on YouTube and piecemeal. But as always, go to LaxFactor.com. You can get yourself some swag. We have shorts. We have T-shirts. We have all sorts of stuff, and we'll be back next week. We're going to kind of be a little bit slow leading into the next couple of weeks, as the season isn't here yet. So I figure through the holiday, we'll just go once a week, spread those videos out on YouTube across 3 quick segments, and then come January, we'll start getting into the real, true preseason nitty-gritty as we approach February's launch. So as always, thank you for watching, and enjoy.